we need to talk about what has got to be arguably one of the coolest yet most obscure functions from all of Bionicle. And it's a function you might not know about, even though it shows up in at least 3 sets, arguably 4. And I even designed a set that kind of by accident does this as well. By the way, master builder set used to make that. So it's something you may be able to make. Stick around for that. We'll take a look at it. By the way, also, if you enjoy this content, be sure to subscribe. I'm Skybird. I make a lot of different animal builds specifically from Bionicle, but of course I have a passion for what you see behind me. And without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this function, because it's a function that also shows up here in 2002. And ideally, I think peaks in this model, but we're very briefly going to talk about the history of this function, because it actually crops up all the way back in 2001 with this set right here. Technically, you could argue it shows up in the Terracotta set as well, though unpictured here because there's a different reason for that. But I call this a disabling feature. When you look at the Kanerama Waka set, of which you see one of here, this set has a primary function that's honestly, it's marvelous. It is a pinnacle of technic design in that you squeeze the body, the head lunges forward with the neck, and as it gets past a crucial point, it disengages the mouth. The mouth opens as it extends, disengages, and snaps shut, ideally with your opponent's mask in it. And in this case here, those are not just masks, but there's a whole stalk that comes with it. It's like ripping your opponent's mask, head, and spine out in one bite. It's overkill, but it's overkill for a reason. Each set comes with 2 masks, and the idea is that when you rip that whole eye stalk out, or mask stalk out rather, the arms are also attached to a function. When I was building this for the very first time in 2003, because that's when I got this set, don't ask, it is wild when I put it together and I was like, there's these rubber bands on the arms, and I thought it was just holders for extra rubber bands in case the rubber bands snapped elsewhere in the model, because it uses a decent amount of rubber bands. But no, they're not holders. I mean, they can be. Rather, they trip another function. It's just a single lift arm that pushes outward, but when it does, it pushes the arms with it. The masks keep those arms in place. It locks them in place. But when the masks are gone, when that whole stalk comes out, that arm's no longer locked and it falls off. What does that do, though? Like, really? Is that a disabling function? Well, kind of. These sets are designed to be used primarily firmly planted on the ground. Ideally, when you have them facing each other, the head can lunge out and can reach your opponent's mask from that point. But when you rip the opponent's arm off, the whole model falls sideways, assuming you're not a kid just playing around with them floating around the air, because that's what kids do, right? And the idea is that when you rip both your opponent's masks off, yeah, the bite still works, but the whole model topples forward. It faces the ground. You'd basically be face planting every time you squeeze a function. And that's cool. It works. But it's a lot harder, I guess, to hit your opponent. However, it's not the only function, or rather the only set to include a function like this, because when we take a look at this set right here, you will notice this set also has masks. It's a little smaller than the Kanerama Waka, but it is smaller because it is the first and only Bionicle set to actually be remote control. It's a really phenomenal build, and the way that it works is fairly simple. You have a controller with 4 buttons. Those buttons turn the right or left treads forwards or backwards. That's all you get. However, those buttons are also paired to the arms as well. So when the set is driving, the set punches repeatedly. It's kind of like the Terracotta, but turned on its side, and it's like a machine gun punch, right? And what this does is, again, you're trying to knock your opponent's mask off, but you will notice in the middle of the build here, there are these eyes, and right in front of that, there are these gears. And those gears, they look cool. Maybe they represent a mouth on a crab. It works, right? But those gears were chosen specifically for a reason. They spin freely on the axle, and that does something. Here's the thing. When you hit your opponent, you're trying to hit your opponent's mask off. And sometimes that'll work. Sometimes you'll knock your opponent's mask off here, but in some cases you won't. And instead, you'll hit this mechanism that those masks are attached to. You might even think of this and just see it as a flaw. You might think that, oh, these lift arms are attached to. They just move because LEGO didn't want to waste extra pieces. They didn't want to use extra pieces to fix these in place. And they barely move anyway. It's a couple millimeters, right? However, it actually does something. Because those gears, they're not fixed in place solidly. They're attached to these rubber bands, and they're barely just kind of teetering there. And when you hit those masks, those lift arms are attached to actually trip this system. They hit that gear assembly, and they push it past its limiting point. I don't know what else to call it. It's passover center, right? And what happens is the gears flip downward, and ideally, on a carpeted surface or a soft surface, those gears bite the surface that it's riding on. And remember, these drive. So when you're driving forward, the gears will get pulled up under the model. If you built this set, you might have been wondering about these gray pins on the back of it and what their purpose serves. They don't really seem to do anything at first. However, when these gears go up underneath the model, what it does is it actually lifts the treads very slightly above the ground. the set can no longer drive. At least kind of. Depending on the surface it's on, the treads will bite occasionally, but it can't drive consistently. You can't really control where it's going to go anymore, or if it's even going to drive at all. It's another disabling function, and it's so simple, but it works so well. However, I talked about how one set in particular is sort of the pinnacle of this design, because this philosophy was actually carried over to 2002 with another set that's kind of Rahi-like. It's essentially Rahi in the spirit, even though it doesn't have a mask on it. It has basically everything else a Rahi has, and even has the biting function of the Kanera and Moaka, although achieved differently via a different mechanism. In this case here, there's a trigger attached directly to the back end and a tail that's a nice and handy little handle as well. And when you pull that trigger, this whole assembly in the neck lunges forward. You'll see that mouth open, and it continues to go forward, pushing these gears along the way until it gets to a point where these lift arms here that stick up and might feel like they stick out like a sore thumb, but they're there on purpose, and they will hit the back of the head. It is worth noting that these rubber bands on the side of the model here are there for a reason, because when the lift arm collides with the head, it pushes the head forward, and that disengages this gear right here from this gear. They can no longer reach each other. There's a little gap. It's hard to see because it's got these little things in the way, right? But generally speaking, it means that the mouth opens, and then it eventually snaps shut. So that's a cool function, right? But there are more rubber bands on this set than just that. For one thing, there's rubber bands that pull all this assembly back together, but there's also a rubber band back here. And again, it might feel like a rubber band holder at first, but it does something, because you're not going after your opponent's masks with these builds. There are no masks. Instead, there's this assembly right here. And what does that assembly do? Well, it is attached to this long axle that gives you something to grab onto with these brutal teeth here, right? You grab onto it and you pull it out. Watch what happens to this lift arm here as I pull that. You see how it lunges upward? So I might want to retaliate against my opponent. They grab my power pack, but maybe I can get back at him, except no, I can't. The function's locked. It can't work anymore, because that assembly, as it lunges upward, actually runs in front of a specific piece in the body that prevents this from moving. You'll see that as it's pulled down, I can move it just fine, but once it goes and you see it shoot up right here, I just can't use it anymore. It's so simple, and it just works. So imagine my shock when I'm designing this build right here. Now, this is an alternate model that I came up with from the Master Builder set specifically, which, if you're not familiar with, by the way, is a wonderful set described as a zoo in a box by Mask of Destiny, and rightfully so, because that's what it is. 15 different animal builds from just one set. Phenomenal. LEGO did not need to go this hard. And not every one of these sets is perfect, but there are 3 birds in this set specifically, one of which has flapping wings. So when I went out of my way to design my own model for the set, of which I've designed a few, I'll throw those on screen as well. A bunny, hermit crab, a chameleon, and then of course a vulture, which we're going to take a look at right now. I wanted to design a bird with a flapping wing function that was a little more dynamic than the one that we got officially, because the Kua bird, as cool as it is, the wings don't flap very much. They're a little bit clunky. The function, the way it works, is actually really cool and intuitive, and it's something you wouldn't really think about normally, or I wouldn't. But this bird right here, the wing flapping on it, it's so much more dynamic. It moves so much further. And that was intentional. That's all I wanted out of this. But I ran into a few other functions along the way, kind of by accident. First off, when I was designing the set, it didn't originally have these claws here, but it did still use these gray pieces because they were just a quick way to assemble the lift arms used and required to flap these wings. So I went ahead and attached these claws because, well, I have them left over in my parts, and it's a bird, right? Big talons. It makes sense. Plus, it's a vulture. It just kind of looks cool when it's perched on those claws. However, when those claws, or rather, when the trigger mechanism is used, you'll see those claws jut forward first. You can also see this as like a punching, flapping motion, whatever. You can use it to rip masks off, but what you can also do with it is when you take a McDonald's Matoran, which has this little lip on the back end of the head here, and you grab around the mask and then let go of the handle, it kind of grabs onto the design of it, not just because of the claws, but because the back of that head actually rides the handle itself here. There's a little bit of an assembly in there that it's able to grab onto, if that makes sense. And so that just works. It can pick up McDonald's Matoran. It also is a balancing point for it as well, so it can actually sit perched on top of McDonald's Matoran, which is just funny in general. But there's a third function here, as we've been talking about disabling functions specifically. And with this set, you'll see that we have this mask on the back here. It is one of only a handful of sets that I've designed, but generally from the Master Builder set, when we take a look back at it for a moment, only 2 of these sets actually wear a mask. So I wanted to make sure that my model, whatever it was going to wear the mask too. But that mask serves a purpose, because what we see here is when the mask is on the model, the wings flap because these lift arms collide with the very side of the mask ever so slightly. But when that mask is removed, those lift arms don't collide with it anymore. The wings get locked up because those lift arms, they're wanting to be pulled down, but they can't because they want to be pulled in the opposite direction. And there's all this plastic in the way. They can't go that way. So they just lock up. They just stop working. And because the rubber band used up here is pulling the wings together, it disables them. It's so simple. It's little things like that. And that's why I have such fond admiration for the Rahi. I grew up with the original Toa, but the Rahi have always been my favorite thing to come out of Bionicle for a number of reasons. You know, I was a big nature fanatic as a kid. I used to go fishing with my dad all the time, and I would always just walk around the lake and see what all I could see of the cranes and vultures that we had here. And so I saw all kinds of really wonderful creatures out there that always inspired me. But also, Rahi are special in a number of ways. There's no real upper cap on what you can design. I designed over 200 and it feels like I could just keep going. Even though when I started designing Rahi, I thought I would never make 10, you know, like 5 would be amazing. Lego made 5 and then combination models of those and 15 in 2002. How could I ever touch that? But you just chip away at it. And so there's something really phenomenal about the Rahi in the sense that they offer so much play and also just so much variety. Like I said, there's no cap and there's no even proper starting place for where to design. I have one Rahi that I designed as a bit of a joke. That's literally just 2 pieces. None of them are Bionicle. It is literally just a helmet and a stethoscope piece. And it's a little snail. It's so damn cute. And it's so simple, right? And because it's a helmet, I can do like a flame helmet and then it's got flames. Anyway, so outside of all of that, there's a lot to love about the Rahi. And there's so much meat on the bone, you know? When it comes to the Master Builder set, yes, Lego designed 15 Rahi, some definitely better than others, but there's plenty of room to go around. I held a competition, I believe, last year, because I like to hold one every year, for people to design their own Rahi from the Master Builder set. The winner, by the way, was a capybara. It was goddamn adorable. But specifically speaking, I love going out of my way and inspiring people to make mucks from the sets that they own or from the parts they own. This build, for example, the Kuma, is made only using parts from the Muwaka that we saw in this video. Just the single set. It doesn't even use both of them, right? And the reason I did that too is because, yeah, while in 2002 Bionicle, or in 2001 Bionicle, you might have got these from buying them off store shelves, in 2020, you know, there are many people who are only able to buy one of these, right? Or someone's selling them, they have one complete and then one incomplete, whatever, right? So often there are many people who only have one in their collection and not the full set of 2, right? So I went out of my way to make sure that people with just one Rahi of a pair still have something to build. And I did this for each Rahi except for the Terracotta. That's going to be in a future video. That said, though, it's the little things, like I said. And ultimately, that's what I want you to come away with from this video. If nothing else, if not even, you know, admiring the fact that these builds have these functions that are so simple but cool and breathe so much more life and tell so much more story with these sets. The Barak, why do they disable? Like, that's not used in the story, but it gives you just something a little extra to kind of develop your own stories around, your own world around. Simple things, little things. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. It helps out the channel tremendously. As always, once again, you can check out the Discord and Instagram, link down in the description below. Patreon is also down there as well. I do have instructions for these guys built as well, so I will make those available over on the Patreon channel on the server. Plus, I want to say, too, that if you were somebody who has went out of your way to pick up my catalog, my Rahi catalog, over 3 gigabytes of stuff, over 1,700 files, it's insane. I also want to open up the Patreon channel to members that have done that as well. Basically making it just a channel in general, celebrating the people who have gone out of their way to help support the channel here. Because why not? Why only keep it exclusive to patrons? I don't know. Anyway, with all that out of the way, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.